Introduction to secondary dominant chords. A dominant chord is a chord that is built on the fifth degree of the scale. So if C was our tonic, we have our C chord, C, E, G. We would go to the fifth scale degree, being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's G, and we would build our chord on G, being G, B, D, or G, B, D, F, if it was a 5-7 chord, or a dominant 7. And what that does is it builds tension and wants to lead us back to the tonic of C. So what happens is in our dominant chord, G7, we have half-step tensions where one voice wants to move a half step up and one voice wants to move a half step down. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that here. So here we have our G7 chord, or our dominant 7, G, B, D, F. And here the B wants to step up a half step to the C in the tonic. So again, that's a half step tension between B and C. Now the other half step tension in our dominant 7 would be the F wanting to step down to the E in the tonic chord. So again, there's our tension, F stepping a half step down to E. So we get this B and F, which is a tritone, or an augmented fourth, the tension. And that's what we hear there. Now, when we say the word chord progression, it is implied that there are often more chords than just 1 and 5, or the tonic and dominant. Now, that's not always true, but in more cases than not, chord progressions contain many more chords. We often find 2 chords, 4 chords, 6 chords, so on and so forth. So we have our tonic and our dominant. Now, each of these other chords, our 2 chord, our 4 chord, our 6 chord, can also have dominant chords leading to that chord in their own respective keys. This is where we get into secondary dominants. So let's talk about what a secondary dominant is. Now, a secondary dominant is a dominant chord that functions as the dominant of a chord other than the tonic. So in this case, it could be the dominant of the 2 chord, for example, or the dominant of the 5 chord. So a little history here. Secondary dominants have been used in music for several centuries, but the concept was not really formalized and named until around the 19th and early 20th centuries. Early uses of secondary dominant chords can be traced back to the Baroque era, where composers such as Bach and Handel would use the technique to add extra harmonic interest and create a sense of tension and resolution in their compositions. And in that music, you frequently hear many chord changes happening in consecutive order. You can hear so on and so forth. Chromaticism was also large during the Romantic era, and here the use of secondary dominants would become more widespread, and they can be heard being used by composers such as Wagner, Chopin, Liszt. These composers were known for pushing the boundaries of traditional tonality and would use secondary dominants as a way to achieve chromatic harmony. Now, we won't quite dig into chromatic harmony yet, but for now, let's talk about some examples of secondary dominants, how they're made, and putting them into use. So here, we'll start with a basic chord progression. We'll start with 1, 4, 5, 1. So we're going to be in the key of C major, and that'll be one chord, our tonic being C, C, E, G. Our 4 chord being F, F, A, C. Our 5 chord being G. And let's make it G7, so we'll do G, B, D, F. Back to our tonic, C. So that's 1, 4, our dominant, G7, 5, and 1, C. Now, if we wanted to add a little more interest to that progression, we could add a secondary dominant to lead us to the 4 chord. So in this case, our 4 chord is F. And in the key of F, the 5th degree would be C. And notice how I'm putting a B flat in there, because we're pretending we're in the key of F. So we have F, G, A, B flat, C. So the 5 of F would be that C. So we'll build a dominant chord on C. That would be C, E, G, and then we'll add our 7 to make it a dominant 7, B flat, which wants to bring us to F. So now we will have our chord progression being 1, 4, 5, 1. Adding that secondary dominant, we'll have 1, 5 of 4, bringing us to that 4 chord, and then 5, bringing us back to 1. Again, that was 1, 5 of 4, 4, 5, 1. And written, it'll look like this in Roman numerals. So here we have our C7, which is a dominant 7 chord, which is not typically in the key of C major. In the key of C major, it would be C major 7, but that 5, 7 of 4 chord is really with a B flat in the top, and that's because it's borrowed from the key of F, the 4 chord. What this is doing, it's adding additional half-step tensions within our chord progression to make it more interesting. So when we start on our C chord, our tonic, we now go to our 5 of 4, where we have the E wanting to go a half step up to F in the 4 chord. And we also have the B flat wanting to go a half step down to A in the 4 chord. So we have our progression again, our 1 chord, then we have our 5 of 4, then our 4, then our 5, 7, back to 1. In this new chord progression, we are going to focus on the 2 chord. We are going to add a 5-7 of 2 to this progression. So for this chord progression, we have our 1 chord, C major, our 2 chord, D minor, 5-7 chord, G7, bringing us back to our 1 chord, C major. Now we want to play and add a 5 of 2. So our 2 chord being that D minor, so starting on D, the 5th scale degree, is A. So we're going to build an A dominant 7 chord, right, using A, C sharp, E, G. That's going to bring us to our 2 chord, D minor. And then back in our original key, we have our G7, which is 5-7 of our tonic, C. So when we add that together, we have our 1 chord, we have our 5 of 2, 2, then the 5 of our tonic C, back to 1. Again, that's 1 chord, A7, which is the 5 of 2, there's our 2. Now to our regular 5, or 5 in our original key, back to C. And here is what that looks like written out. So I do want to take a moment to talk about the half-step movement in our chords from our 5-7 of 2 to our 2 chord. So from our A7, 5-7 of 2 to our 2 chord, D minor. If you notice, we have half step movement from our C sharp and our A7 chord, which is the 3rd, to the root of our D minor chord. So from the 3rd of our A7 chord, C sharp, to the root of D minor. And we also have movement, half step movement from the E, the 5th of that chord, to F, which is the 3rd of our D minor chord. So half step movement from C sharp to D and from E to F. So we get this effect inside of this chord progression. And again, the reason we are talking about this is we are going to dig a little bit into chromatic harmony soon. So let's add together some of these secondary dominants we've been working on. We can add the 5 of 2 and the 5 of 4. All right, so we have our 1 chord, C major. We have our 5-7 of 2, A dominant 7 to our 2 chord, D minor to our 5 chord in our original key, G7 to 1. Now 5 of 4, C7 to our 4 chord, back to 5-7, back to 1. So we are going to look at the example RLE. Let's look at the first 4 measures. We have some familiar chords there. Our 1 chord, 2 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord. What we can do here is we can add a 5 of 5 before that G chord. So if G is our 5th chord, and the 5th scale degree of G is D, we would add a D major chord. So we can do that on beats 3 and 4 of the second measure. So we'll start off with our C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would sound a little like this with the melody. We would have So again, the first 4 measures written out just on the chords there. We have our first measure C for 4 beats, 3, 4, D minor, 2, D major, and then G, 3, 4, and then C, 2, 3, 4. And the reason that D major is there, that is the 5 of G, which is the 5 of C. So we have our 5 of 5, which is D major, leading us to our 5 chord G. Again with the melody. D minor, D major, G. So I want to look towards the end of the song here and add another secondary dominant. More specifically, I want to look at the last 5 measures. We have our C chord and our whole note E. And then to make it more interesting, I want to look at our D minor chord on the last line there. That's a minor 2 chord. I would like to add a 5 of 2. And where I would like to put it is the measure before on beats 3 and 4. So on the F of the measure before. So we'll have our C chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reason I find that interesting, not only does the secondary dominant, the 5 of 2, leading to our D minor chord, add harmonic interest, but it also creates a half-step harmony between the F in the melody That's our F right there. And between the 5/7 of 2, we have an E in that chord, the 5th. So we have an E in that chord and an F in the melody. Now that does sound like it clashes, but what we're doing is creating a tension, and it sounds a lot better in movement. So we'll have the 5th from last measure, our C major chord, and our whole note E starting there. We will have this. And again, our 5 of 2, or the A dominant 7 moving to the D minor, our 2, we have an E, which is the 5th of that A dominant 7 chord, which clashes with the F in the melody there. And what happens is we have a resolution when it goes to the D minor chord. So here we are going to dig into chromatic harmony, and how we are going to do that is going to be by using some simple chord progressions, sort of like the ones we touched on earlier, our secondary dominant chords to add interest and to give us access to more notes with accidentals borrowed from other keys, and also inversions where we, quick review, we take a note other than the root and put it in the base of the chord. And we'll take a quick moment to go over that here. So we can use C major as an example. We have our C, E, G, or our root, 3rd, 5th. If we were to put the 3rd in the lowest voice or the base of the chord, we would still have these 3 notes, just in a different order. We can do E, G, C. That's an example of an inverted C major chord, 6-3 inversion with the 3rd in the bass. We can also have the 5th of the chord, G, in the bass. We can use the spelling G, C, E to make a 6-4 inversion. So we still have C major, but with our G in the bass. Now, if you remember from our earlier part of our lesson, we have half-step tendencies in dominant chords. That's why they want to resolve. So for example, when we go from our G chord, or G dominant 7, to C, we have our B step up to C, right? And we have our F in that chord, step down to the E. So if we were to invert our 5 chord in this case, we could put the B, the 3rd of the chord, in the bass, giving us a half step to the root of C, our 1 chord. So that's just dominant and tonic. Now we can do the same effect with secondary dominants. And we'll take a look at this next chord progression here. So if we look at this chord progression, we have, right in order, In the key of C, it would be our C major chord, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, and A minor. So that's just in the key of C, our 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord. So looking at that, we have our C, our 2 chord, D minor, 3 chord, E minor, 4 chord, F major, 5 chord, G major, 6 chord, A minor. So our bass line is just moving up C, D, E, F, G, A. Or in this case, from C, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, right? Now we can take that same chord progression, and what we can do is add a secondary dominant before each of these chords. So we would move from the 1 chord to the 5 of 2, to the 2 chord, to the 5 of 3, to the 3 chord, to the 5 of 4, to the 4 chord, to the 5 of 5, to the 5 chord, and then to the 5 of 6, to the 6 chord. So we have 1, 5 of 2, 2, 5 of 3, 3, 5 of 4, 4, 5 of 5, 5, 5 of 6, 6. And this is a great exercise that I like to do to help point me in the direction of getting familiar with chromatic harmony. We will start by familiarizing ourselves with these chords and then move into inverting some of these chords so the bass line is moving by half step or chromatic. So at first we'll have our 1 chord, like pictured, C major. Then we'll have our 5 of 2, which if our 2 is D, the 5 would be A major, or we could even make it A7, going to our 2 chord. Then we need the 5 of 3, which would be E, and the 5th from E is B, so we would go to B major, or we could do B7 to E. Now here's where it gets tricky. We have 5 of 4, which is really that C dominant chord, because 4 is our F, and the 5th is C. So we have our C, the 5 of 4 going to 4, then the 5 of 5, which is our G chord, so the 5 of that would be D. We could also do D7 to 5, and then our 6th chord is A, so the 5th of that, E, right? So we would have our E major, or we could do E7, going to our 6th chord, A minor. So together, that would look and sound like this. We have our 1 chord, 5 of 2, 2, 5 of 3, 3, 5 of 4, 4, 5 of 5, 5, 5 of 6, 6. So here, some of the chords spelt out. We have our 1 chord, C, E, G, C. We have our 5/7 of 2. This D is our 2 chord. 5/7 of 3. That's the 5/7 of 4. That's the 5/7 of 5. And that's the 5/7 of 6. So I'll see if I can write that tiny enough. Now if we look, this would originally be our bass line if we kept everything in root position, but because of the half-step tendencies that dominant chords like to create, you'll notice we can find a nice little pattern here where we can go from the C here to C sharp, so we'll put the 3rd in the bass for our 5/7 of 2. Go back to the root for the 2 chord, D. Put the 3rd in the bass here on the D sharp for this chord, 5/7 of 3. Our 3 chord, we'll have the E in the bass. Now we can go to the 3rd of our 5/7 of 4, and we can just stay on that E for that chord. So we're going C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and then we'll have F, which is the root of our 4 chord, half step up from E, good, and then the 3rd of our 5/7 of 5 will be F sharp to our 5 chord, G. There's our half step again, G to G sharp, which is the 3rd of the 5/7 of 6, going to our 6 chord, A. So if you look, we're alternating between root 3rd, root 3rd, root 3rd. So we're alternating between root position and our 6/3 inversions, giving us a chromatic bass line. So in its entirety, that would look like this played. We would have our 1 chord with C in the bass, and then our C sharp, the 3rd of the 5 of 2, moving to the 2 chord with the D in the bass, and then the 5/7 of 3, which is our B7, the 3rd in the bass, that D sharp, going to our 3 chord, E. Now we're going to keep that E in the bass for the 5/7 of 4, bringing us to our 4 chord. Now our 5 of 5, keeping that 3rd in the bass on that chord, like in our picture, which would be F sharp, bringing us to the G in our 5 chord, up to our 5/7 of 6 with the 3rd in the bass, so that would be G sharp in the bass to our A. So just a little quicker in time, we would have be our chromatic baseline that we made.